we then will have a small break of 5 minutes, and then we'll have Sam Harris talk about EdTech Trends. And then after also another small break, we'll have Andrew Morgan talking about EdTech investment trends. So a lot about trends today, which is what you wanted from the poll that Pete sent out with the topics that AWS EdTech EdStart team have proposed. And we're very thankful to Ivan and the rest of the team for being available to talk to you about these topics. And Ivan, also up to you to let us know how you want to go with questions. So if you want questions to come in as you're talking or at the end, and that can also change from presenter to presenter. And one thing that we like to do after usually long sessions, but since today we have 3 blocks, is to ask the founders to write their main insights about the session. So we can use a little bit of the break to do that. It's good for remembering, and also I guess for you to know what kind of stood out as the most insightful, surprising, whatever that comes out of it. So over to you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon for you guys. I hope everything is nice and well. Just do a quick check. Everyone can hear me nice and well? Awesome, great. I am actually going to share my screen as well. So what I would like to do when it comes to Q&A in general is I will take short breaks in between for Q&As rather than just leave Q&As towards the back. I think it is a lot more interactive. I can see all of you because I've got a multi-screen setup as well. So I would really encourage all of you to turn on your videos and we have a nice interactive session. Ask questions anytime you like, and then we'll take from the questions, we have a much better conversation rather than just me sharing things. I think that's not what I really want. I think me and Sam, when we thought of this session, we really wanted to provide all the founders with a good summary of the insights that we have seen in Asia Pacific, especially in EdTech over the years, or at least in the last 12 months. Things have moved really quickly in the EdTech scene, and we thought it would be great for us to just do a quick update as well. So I'm going to share my slides, all right, just to make sure that everyone's okay. There we go. Slides up. Great. Those are some of those questions we keep asking nowadays, right? All right, so originally the plan was for Sam to start off with more general EdTech trends before I took over and did the technology trends. But unfortunately, we have some conflict in terms of appointments, and I had to start first. But broadly speaking, it's not going to affect your experience. So let me just start off introducing myself. My name is Ivan. I'm actually the EdTech technical lead for Amazon Web Services in Asia Pacific. Me and Sam, we run this program called EdStart. And EdStart is an accelerator program that really supports the education technology firms. So as the technical lead, what I do is I really spend a lot of time talking to founders, talking to technical leads, talking to CTOs, finding out their problems, what they want to build, how they want to build it. So I get a lot of these difficult conversations when we have to go like, okay, we need to build this, but we don't really know how to build it, or we need to build it fast. How do we do it, right? So I'm very much on the ground speaking to a lot of founders, technical founders, and co-founders. So just a little bit about myself before we get started to set a bit of context. I started my career as a teacher. Right? I'm a chemistry teacher by training, and I spent a good number of years teaching chemistry to high school kids. So I've been on the other side of the table, right, where I have to use education technology in an institutional sense, and yet I cannot just buy technology. I have a whole procurement process in the Singapore school as well. So I used to be a school administrator, so I understood the whole process of getting an LMS is not as simple as we think it is. After a while, I decided, okay, maybe I didn't want to teach in a classroom. So I actually went out and I did my own startup in EdTech. And I basically, that was a good number of years ago where platforms were less common. So I did a couple of EdTechs and a good exit. Then I decided to do my MBA, and then I joined AWS on this advisory role, really helping EdTechs build stuff. So I've gotten my hands deep in the trenches, and I understand the challenges that EdTech founders have. EdTech in general, it's a very difficult space. Unlike the normal startup scene, the EdTech scene is really very challenging in the sense of, let's just say, procurement. Getting what we built into schools itself, it's a 12, 24-month process compared to a startup that can easily sell their software to many different businesses very quickly in a month or maybe 3 months, perhaps, right? So what we actually have when it comes to this EdStart program is really a virtual accelerator for our startup companies, especially in education technology, to support them, not just from a technological point of view, but also from a business end of things. Sam will bring you through a little bit more about the details, but some of the programs that I run, for example, as part of the EdStart program is I run things like office hours where co-founders, tech leads, lead developers can drop in and say, hey, Ivan, we've got a problem. This is the problem that we are having and we don't know how to solve it. So just an example, yesterday I had a conversation with a startup founder that was trying to use AI for adaptive question recommendation in schools. He's a developer by training, but he has limited AI background. So I actually brought in an AI expert from AWS, and we had a really productive 2 sessions together on how to use SageMaker, bring various models in order for them to try and implement in their systems, right? The other thing I do is things like what we call well-architect review, which is basically just a sense of how the setup of the various technology pieces are done by the companies to ensure that if suddenly, TechCrunch or EdSearch features you guys and you go from 100 users a day to 10,000 users a day, can your infrastructure cope? That kind of stuff. It is surprisingly common to have this kind of surges, especially in this day and age where information actually goes up very quickly and teachers do recommend a lot of good software to other teachers, right? Or even parents doing that as well. So this kind of preparation is something that we really encourage our founders really to think about, because when you are preparing for that search, during the search, you are losing a lot of customers. And that's something you really do want to think about a bit earlier, right? So in EdStart, we actually have different tiers as well, but basically what we really try and do from a technological perspective is to provide you and your teams when it comes to development to help you guys build an experiment in a structured manner, and also to help you guys with things like go-to-market as well as investments in terms of marketing. It's not just a technology program. It is something that we hope would help you. Now I'm just going to move a little bit more over to the trends. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, mainly because I think we have all seen some of these major trends. In the last 12 months, when COVID has hit, ministries and governments have rapidly scaled their responses, really working with various stakeholders to bring schools online, in short, because schools are closed. And you have 2 options. When the schools are closed, you either not have the kids learning or you learn online, right? There really isn't that much in between. And parents aren't completely equipped to teach their kids at home. And very few schools are well prepared in many parts of the world for a completely online way of learning, right? So what I have on the screen is just a simple map from UNESCO that shows the majority of the countries that have really completely shut down schools in April last year. Towards the end of the year and the start of this year so far, some countries have tried to reopen the schools to various extents, right? But a vast majority of the governments have found themselves really needing to go and build this whole infrastructure from scratch at a national level to provide the schools to do it. And sometimes we know that governments aren't really the best when it comes to doing this. So some schools have taken things into their own hands to really try and help them move online as well, right? However, really, in many of these cases, infrastructure just isn't there either at the school level or in many of our developing countries, especially like in Indonesia, in Philippines, in our region, the last mile connectivity really isn't there. One of our members really works very hard to try and solve that last mile connectivity problem where in the villages in Indonesia, for example, you can barely get a cell phone signal. So what they do is they work on a piece of hardware where the kids can go to the school to download the information from like a unit. And then when they go home, they can study it on their small little phones, right? So that kind of last mile connectivity problem is actually a very big problem in our part of the world, in India, in Philippines, in Indonesia. It's one of these problems that we call them hidden problems because you don't get this kind of coverage in EdTech news, especially in developed country EdTech news, right? But it's a very big problem in the developing countries. So because of all of these, about 1.5 billion K-12 students.
It's a pretty big problem here as well in Australia, with remote students not having enough bandwidth to keep the technology up for long enough. So even if they manage to log on for a short period of time, so that, yeah, the problem is not just for the developing world.
Yeah, definitely. Like broadband connectivity, we all, especially founders and news organizations that are in big cities, they don't see it as a problem because it's a big city, right? Bandwidth is something that is assumed to not be a problem. So actually, when we work with some of our members, we tell them, look, you got to design from a design thinking perspective for your extreme users. Let's assume that your users have only 500 kilobytes of bandwidth. Please don't stream a 4K video. You don't really need a 4K video for them to learn.
Yeah.
Think about that thing, like design your systems from that perspective. So that kind of thinking about features, product sets, really important. I have a lot of members in Singapore. In Singapore, bandwidth is never a problem. And the products they design are amazing, but also very bandwidth intensive, which means that if you go to various parts of the world, in fact, many parts of the world, it's just not going to work out fine.
Yeah,
right?
we had to work out how to do a downloadable version of the inventory.
Yeah, really, that's very important.
To PDF in the end.
Yeah.
So that the whole thing goes to sort of PDF and then a separate video library that linked across.
Yeah, no, so that's a very important problem, right? So at a small scale, being able to convert to PDF is something doable, and you can actually do it manually. But for some of the members we have seen, especially like in India or in the US, where you have to do millions of documents going from Word to PDF in a day, you can't do that kind of thing manually, right? How do we build that process to ensure that your startup is scalable and able to deliver that kind of thing? The other place where we see a lot of opportunity and a lot of investments is really in higher education. The reality is this: higher education has a lot more money than K-12 in many parts of the world. And because of that, higher education is more able to respond, but they also have different sets of problems, right? 41% of higher ed presidents that we actually talked to were really unsure when their institution will open. And this survey was actually conducted sometime in April last year. And we have seen really that we don't expect campuses to open very much. And even if they do, it's going to be very much virtual, right? So we have asked the universities, what do you need most? And these are the three things that they tell us: financial health and operational planning, instructional technology development, and student support services, right? And this is important because at the end of the day, you want to ensure that the students still have a great experience while keeping themselves really healthy. So broadly speaking, this is what I see, right? The whole phase of things. The first phase was really, okay, COVID has hit, we can't have kids in class. Let's just go online, like in any way possible. Skype, Google Meet, whatever, like Google Drive, any Dropbox, just get online. That was the first phase. We are very much beyond the first phase of just get online. I think all the schools have gotten online in one way or another. Either the teachers themselves have done it, the schools have done it, or at a national level, they have just gone online. The next few problems to solve really is going to be improving the online experience, right? So the schools have come online in the last 12 months. They have gotten the basics of what they need to work: whiteboard solutions, file sharing solutions, video solutions, right? They work, but they don't really work well with each other. I was just talking to a teacher in the US 2 or 3 days ago, and she uses 7 different tools in class, in a virtual class in an hour. And she has to keep alternate tabbing, toggling one website for virtual whiteboarding, one website for polling. So this online experience for the teacher as well as the student is really bad. So the next 12 to 24 months, what we are seeing a lot of investments from the product builders and the schools are really improving that online experience for the kids, for the teachers and the administrators. So we're starting to see moves away from things like pure delivery of video services like Zoom into more integrated solutions when it's a whole package that teachers can deliver that kind of online lessons in a single place to have a better learning experience, to have a more coordinated and centralized repository of everything, right? So a lot of schools are going to be doing that for the next 12 to 24 months because I think some administrators have woken up and realized that, look, this is going to last for a while. It's not just going to be a 12-month thing. And even if we completely recover from COVID, this hybrid learning model is going to stay on for a while or forever, right? So what we have in the last 3 blocks, improving the online experience, optimizing the online experience, and rethinking and innovating about the online experience from a technology perspective is something that we really think is going to be very big for the next 12 to 24 months moving forward. From a more deeper point of view when it comes to tech, there are a few areas specifically that we are seeing. Mass migration of various technologies and content onto the cloud, right? There is no longer a way for you to deliver pen and paper assessment if the kids are not in school, like completely no way. You can stick to it for 20 years because you are in school, but now that the kids are forced to stay at home, and even the university students are forced to stay at home, you have to find a way, right? So every single part of the school is forced to move online into the cloud. Now, the reason why I focus on the cloud is a lot of schools who have on-premise infrastructure, that means data centers and everything in the schools or in the universities, they simply cannot cope because everything has gone online. The number of servers you need to handle all these things just doesn't work out. So a lot of them have moved completely into what we call public clouds like Amazon Web Services because we allow them to scale very quickly to deploy. And it's something that it has, in my opinion, it's been a lifesaver for many schools because even if they had started to purchase servers at the start of the pandemic, they would probably get their servers about a year later, which is not acceptable, right? The other thing that we are seeing is really an increased capacity amongst the publishers and faculty, really in terms of trying to cost manage in terms of increasing training opportunities for faculty. Faculty, either in K-12 or in universities, are not trained to teach online. They hate teaching online. They were forced to teach online. But now they know they have to continue teaching online. What we are going to have in the next 12 months or so is a lot of training to get faculty to teach online in a better manner. As a former teacher, I would tell you it is extremely difficult. Teaching in the classroom is almost completely different from teaching online. The pedagogies are different. The way you interact with your students are different. In a class, if I walk in a classroom, I can sense my students. I know who's not paying attention. Online is completely impossible, right? So that whole level of training needs to be redone at massive scales. The last one we see is really a rapid creation of like new platforms and apps in terms of content, because quizzing apps is something that it's a bit different to get online, for example. So every single part of a whole classroom experience, if people create different apps for it, either virtually or on phones, really just to get kids students, teachers, administrators to get the school going. So these are 4 broad areas. Course management is something that's very big. We don't see it often, but the biggest customers are actually the ones that go down into the nitty-gritty details, the unsexy business of how you run a school and an education institution, the nuts and bolts of a school, right? Because you save a lot of manpower and money over there, right? So in terms of broad trends, what we are seeing in Asia Pacific is really the building of MOOC platforms on AWS. I think in the last 12 months, a lot of EdTech builders feel that they cannot trust their own national governments to deliver a high quality education to the students. So many EdTech builders have come in and said, let's try and do it ourselves. Right? So there have been really a lot of MOOC platforms for kids, for university students to take the opportunity of really schools, governments, universities not being able to deliver a high quality education. And this is a moment for a lot of these big platforms, right? Byju's is one of them, right? They really scaled very quickly. They are on AWS, they scaled very quickly. Purely because in India, for example, suddenly the schools were just shut down. And the kids had to find some way to learn. The schools were not ready to deliver, right? But Byju really had a lot of content that was ready for the kids to learn. That's how they took the opportunity to scale really quickly. And at AWS, we empower them to do that purely because we rethink about how the systems work. So instead of having a server, the way we get our coach, our founders really to think about things is you want to break your systems apart such that if one system fails, you know, there are ways that you can go about without your whole application failing on you, right? So we really have that kind of consultancy services of sorts, advisory services to help builders rethink about how we go from what we call a monolithic architecture into a modular architecture where we have independent pieces so that even if one or another piece fails, you still can deliver a good online education to your end customers. The other thing that has been very helpful really is the global delivery. Some of our customers actually start, or actually not most, but actually a lot of them would really start with a single region, like in Australia, but they will want to go into the UK, the US, Indonesia, for example. And the benefits of using AWS really is we have we have servers in many, many different regions that allow our customers to be able to deploy their applications around the world really quickly. So just about last week, I was talking to an Indian customer and their frontier markets are in Spain and in France. So they are using our services to translate millions of what they have in English in terms of their resources into French and Spanish automatically and deploying them on our servers in Europe to reach their end customers in Europe, right? The other thing that has been very big, as I said, really is the improvement of the virtual learning experience where it is not just like a Zoom call anymore, right? One of the things that the teachers I spoke to tell us is sometimes it's very difficult to get the kids to say, okay, you know, I need you to visit this website. I need you to visit the other website right now because I use 10 different tools in the classroom. Every single time there is a new tool, I need to paste the link in the chat box. The kids have to click it. I don't know whether they click it or they are watching YouTube. This kind of things really happen. So what we see moving forward really is an improvement in the virtual learning environment completely in terms of the student side of things where we have everything integrated, a one button push, and a lot of the different ad techs are really trying to solve that experience. The other thing that we do see a lot is the digitization of schools where ad techs would focus on one block of that whole school chain where it could either be student-teacher communication, teacher-parent communication, school administration, and so on and so forth. right? So a lot of focus is really on the delivery of the classes by the teachers, for example. But in EdTech, in schools, the other thing that's really very important are things like parent-teacher communication. How do we sustain that? When the pandemic hit in Asia, a lot of people just went on WhatsApp. So the teachers just started getting the parents' numbers, put everyone into one huge WhatsApp group, and they started talking there. That was okay for the start, but in the long term, it's not sustainable, right? So technology has come in. So one of our members, School Bus, actually works to try and solve that problem. So my point here is think about the whole stack when it comes to the school and teacher interaction, the whole school experience, and where and how your EdTech really plays a part in it, right? So just an example that we have from Australia itself, we have a School Bytes, which is actually a cloud-based SaaS administrative solution. As I said, a lot of these things that are being built are the less sexy stuff, the nuts and bolts, the pipes that keeps schools running, right? And this is actually set up by a very young founder in Australia who found that it's really inefficient when it comes to administration in schools. And they were hosted on AWS. They use many different services on AWS, and they joined us at the end of 2018. And we really helped them to get to market really by joint media opportunities, helping them ensure that their systems are up to scratch. Because the thing about going into government contracts, for example, is things like SLAs, where you have to ensure that your systems are up for a good amount of the time, 99.99% of the time, for example. How do you design your architectures to do that, right? So with our help, they have actually also gone into 430 schools in New South Wales, and they help to manage about 300,000 students and about 45,000 student staff, right? And they have grown really big, and they have worked with some of our partners when it comes to development of the infrastructure and the technology. Right. I'm just going to take a short break here to ask if anyone has any questions about the things I've shared, or feel free to just type it in. Anyone?
I think it's really interesting that there's almost like two bits to the technology side of things. There's almost like the bandwidth and capability of the delivery system, and then there's the bandwidth and capability of the receivers. And actually both have their own sets of problems, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought of it in that way because we've been so student focused. We've only really focused on the difficulties the students have had in downloading. It hadn't occurred to me to think about issues we might have if we suddenly got 1 million users in terms of production. And this is like, I'm thinking, oh, what happens if we go big, quick?
It is something you do want to plan for and make sure that you have that capability to go up to service that scale. You don't have to do it now, right? In terms of being able to service like 1 million customers now, but you must have a plan in place. And that's something I always tell our members. You need to have a plan to scale up immediately, because if you do get a favorable press coverage by a newspaper in Sydney, for example, right? Then you want to take that opportunity. You don't want to lose that opportunity. So plans like this, from a technology perspective, is something I do sit our members down and really get them to think about. How do we prepare for that, right? Any other questions, everyone? No? So if not, I'm just going to move on to some of these future trends that we see moving forward for the next 12 months and how technology really helps our members to be ready for it. AI, ML is this very big buzzword that everyone throws into education technology. And to me, it is not just a buzzword. It is something that actually is very useful to the teachers and the kids, right? AWS helps to build this next generation of AI with what we call SageMaker. So SageMaker is something, it's our AI tool that allows experts to really be able to build learning models for AI in order to implement that. AI to me is very important because it makes teachers more efficient. AI, in my opinion, will never replace teachers in the near to medium term. It is not going to happen. But it is a very powerful tool for teachers to offload things that are less important to teachers, so that teachers can focus on the high value education part of teaching, right? So things like repetitive administration, question recommendation, simple grading and assessment. If we can offload that to AI, for example, that will free the teachers up to do a lot of things, which I think is going to be very impactful, right? So actually a lot of our startups are really looking at using AI to think about where they can use it as a force multiplier for teachers in order for it to be more effective in schools. The other thing that is actually very big, and we have spoken a lot about with a lot of our members, is really building classroom experiences. So at AWS, we have a system called Amazon Chime, which is a video conferencing tool. And actually what we have is a lot of builders are using Amazon Chime to build interactive, amazing experiences to integrate into their apps. And I think this is something that's very powerful, because every single time the kids get out of the app, like Zoom, for example, into a website, there is a chance that you lose their attention, or they see a pop-up somewhere and then Zoom, you lose them. Having that whole environment in a single place built to help our kids focus is something that is very important and very difficult. I think our kids now, our students now in general, are very easily distracted. Any single chance of getting them to jump over the place to do things, it's going to be very difficult for them to stay focused. And we want to help them stay focused when they are learning, right? So beyond all of these, we also do have a lot of some of these other solutions that helps to support remote learning. Simple things like remote desktop from our employees and for students, right? So a lot of students don't have very powerful computers at home. And if you are doing like an engineering undergraduate degree in the University of New South Wales, there's no way you can do a lot of this modeling at home, right? So what we do have some members actually building special solutions that allow undergraduates to connect to their school systems and run processing either on AWS cloud or in their schools, for example, right? We have helped universities with virtual contact and support, because there are so many questions that come in about, is school open? What time is school open? What are the new quarantine rules? Things change so quickly that contact centers in schools and universities are not used to that volume. So some universities and schools have actually made use of our contact center solutions to actually help manage that, right? Also talking about remote communication and collaboration, helping the students work with other students. I think that's something that's very important. The problem with a virtual class like this is I can deliver a lecture, but how do we help the students interact and engage better with each other? That's a skill that's important to learn in a school. And they don't get to do that virtually very well. So those are some of those things that we do want to help them a little bit, right? So at AWS, we do have a lot of people building on AWS, and we do encourage you also, if you are building a tech solution, to build on AWS for very simple reasons, right? Agility. The cloud allows you to spin up a server and take down a server like in minutes. So I have a customer that really brings out a server, build something, try something, doesn't work, shuts it down. They pay like $1 for it for an hour of use, or maybe more than that. That kind of agility, if you have to buy a server, you're stuck with the server, right? Cost savings, you only pay for what you use. A lot of schools and edtechs that work with us, I actually tell them to shut down their systems to minimal, to the lowest levels at night, because the reality is students and teachers are not going to be doing that much at 2 a.m. compared to 2 p.m. And that kind of cost savings, being able to bring up and shut down the servers, is something that for a startup is very important, because then you can save the money to do other things like marketing, business development, which I think is better used than to keep a server running if it's not being used. right? And so this is the idea of elasticity, where you can just scale up, scale down. One of our Indonesian customers went up in terms of number of users within like 100 times in a month. And they could very quickly spin up servers in order to cope with that kind of load. And that's very important, because if you have to buy stuff, it's a problem. I think one of the most important things is the ability to innovate faster. When you have a feature, you release it, you get a sense of whether something works or not. If it doesn't work, take it down or iterate very quickly on it. And the AWS Cloud's very quickly allows for our members to be able to do that, right? Going global in minutes, I shared that experience about some of our members going into Europe. That kind of ability to deploy globally with minimal latency issues is actually very important, especially if you are doing a video call. We are very sensitive to lag. If it's just half a second, you will feel that it's a very unnatural conversation that we are having, right? So these are small little things when it comes to experiences in teaching that's very important. Because if the student feels that, you know, it's unnatural, they would be very, very distracted, right? And AWS Cloud really has the broadest service breadth that we have available for all our members to really experiment, from AI to even transcription to translation, live translation. I think those are amazing capabilities that we think would help our members really go out and change the world, right? So just going to very quickly close up on some of these major issues when it comes to tech. In the next 12 months, we are going to see a lot of development in AI and adaptive learning technologies. We see that now. We see a lot of people actually working on it now. I'm not sure if we are going to get results in the next 12 months, but there are a lot more people working on this now than they were 24 months ago. These adaptive learning technologies will not replace teachers. They will increase teacher productivity and increase opportunities for students to do self-directed learning and to improve the student learning experience. So I highly encourage you to think about how you can use AI and machine learning to really improve your student experience, your teacher experience, in order for you to deliver more with less. Data is going to be very big in the next 12 months or 24 months. The reason why I'm sharing this is because now that you are a founder and you are building something, you want to think about what kind of data you are collecting. Now, this data is not bad in terms of like, data has had a very bad name in the last 12 months, right? Especially when it comes to data collection and everything. But data is important because it tells you what works and what doesn't work. Right. So I do highly encourage you to think from a technology perspective to think about what data you want to collect in order for you to improve teaching and learning. Let me give you an example. A startup would want to think about collecting simple data like a question's response rates and its hit rate, whether how many percent of students get it right or wrong. Right. Those are simple things you can collect that tells you a lot of things. If you have a question and 70% of the students get the question wrong, it tells us something, right? So think about what you are collecting now, because data actually is something that takes time to collect. The last thing I just want to talk about really is security. If you are building a technology platform, security is very important. And as EdTech founders, a lot of us don't think about security. Security is a lot more complex than you think. And in the next 12 to 24 months, there will be a lot of opportunities in the security space for education, for schools, universities, EdTechs. It's not there yet, but it will be, right? These few days, there was just yesterday or the day before, there was just a report out about how high performance computing in universities was potentially breached. These are issues that schools and universities need to grapple with, because at the start of the whole pandemic, they just went online. Security was the least of their concerns. now people are starting to worry a lot about security. So when you are building what you are building, please be mindful of security. Please be mindful to take a look at it. And my recommendation is to have one person in charge of it. It is important. It is something that you want to take a look at it. And at AWS, we do have a whole suite of things that helps you to improve your security posture. But to us, the most important thing is having someone to look at it and ensure that you at least have done the minimal best practices so that what you guys are doing, your teachers, your students, they are safe. All right. With that, I will just stop here. This is where you can find some of these extra resources that we have spoken about. And this is just my contact. And with that, I would open the floor to additional questions if any of you have any. And hopefully, then we can take this conversation forward.
Thank you so much, Ivan. That was so interesting. I think you kind of summarized a lot of the things that we've been seeing this year and discussing with the cohort of Future Minds and also with other EdTech startups like Grasshopper. And yeah, also kind of having a bit of guidance on what do you expect to be happening in the future, both in the region and worldwide. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. Do you have any questions, founders? Kelly, and I didn't know if you were raising your hand to ask a question or saying no.
Oh, I was actually writing it, but if you'd like me to just mention it, I will. Mine's really just in relation to content curation. I know that it's really, none of the business of a tech provider to curate content, but just lately with some of the censorship that I've seen, what policies does AWS have for, EdTech? Like, for example, if I were to build, a platform, because I work in critical thinking. So, I'm really concerned, to be honest, with these tech platforms and the initiative they take to sort of police content. Do you have any position on that?
So we do have our terms of service that we have that very clearly state out what is acceptable on the platform and what's not acceptable on the platform. And we do have an enforcement team that takes a look at all of these, right? But I think what's important for us from an educator's perspective is, for example, if you do have something, but you are using it for a valid purpose, right? It is something that should not violate the terms of service, but it's something you do want to be a bit careful about, especially because anything that's online generally can be taken out of context, in my opinion. Yeah. So it's I would say from an instructional perspective, do be a bit careful with that, so that people cannot say that you are, for example, inciting violence. Right, but I understand where you're coming from, especially if you do need to have an article that is an example of that, putting it on the platform to say, hey, this is something that incites violence, for example. Right. Broadly speaking, we actually have very clear policies also on what we can see and what we cannot see. Right, we cannot delve into your servers and dig through every single piece of your code or access your files because those are your servers. We have very clear policies and technologies that enable you to do that as well, to protect your information. So I would assure you that it is not something that you need to be that concerned about.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Because I wouldn't want to be somebody who had invested a year or two and hundreds of thousands of dollars and sort of turn around and find that I had no platform to work with. Thanks.
Any other questions, anyone?
I have a question just about the AWS EdStart program. So
Sure.
we're an early learning technology company, and we are primarily focusing on 3 to 5-year-olds up to 6-year-olds. Some kids doing a pilot with a school as well. But is the AWS EdStart program open to earlier than K-12?
Oh, definitely. As long as you are a EdTech firm, we open you, wide open arms. To us, EdTech is very broad, and we have this program to support EdTechs in any space, because we do acknowledge that it is a very difficult space to be in, and just building this whole ecosystem and community of EdTechs. People help to learn each other. We do have a lot of members that are also in like the early childhood space. They do different things, right? But definitely we don't just service like K-12 or universities. As long as you're at EdTech, we welcome you guys with open arms.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good to know. I think that was one of the reasons we hadn't gone ahead and got in touch. But yeah, cool. Thanks for that.
I'm sure Sam would share a bit more later.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, Sam.
Hey, everyone. I certainly will. Yeah, once you guys have had a break, right, Philippa?
Yes, so we're a little bit over time. Do we have time for a break, Sam? Because I think that will then be eating on yours and Andrew's bits.
I'll leave it to the room. I don't want to impose on your bio break, but I can kind of cut mine down to 25 minutes as opposed to 30. So yeah, maybe we can ask them to go to the toilet if they'd like to. Yeah, no worries.
Okay, very quick bio break. And he asks, all right, so 4 minutes until 1:55 our time, whatever 55 is in your time. All right.
Awesome.
Before that, Ivan, thank you so much. It was amazing hearing from you. Ivan put his contacts there. If in case you don't have it or lost it, let us know. We have it. But yeah, it was very interesting. Thank you so much. All right, bio break.
Or cake break if you want.
Yeah, welcome, Sam. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
I think you're in Singapore as well, correct?
Yeah, correct.
And you're the EdTech lead. Okay, fantastic. So go ahead. And as I said to Ivan before, with the questions you can do however you'd like. So you can ask people to jump in, or after do a few breaks. I'll leave it for the end. Whatever you prefer.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I guess we're a bit short on time, so maybe just wait until the end, unless it's really burning. Feel free to jump in. But yeah, Ivan and I sort of work hand in glove together. So excited to kind of share in this short presentation some of the trends that we're seeing in the market around EdTech. Really, the way that we'd love to engage with you all is through the AWS EdStart program. That's our regional global program that engages EdTech startups. I'll share more details on that as we go through the presentation. But everything that I talk about in the slides, from a trends perspective, I've tried to put in examples from our members across the region that are actually invested into those areas. So you can get a sense of what our membership portfolio looks like, but also if you want to connect with them, there's learnings that I think EdTechs can take from each other, not just inside Australia, but across the whole region. And that's a really big part of the program that we have. So I think Ivan might have showed this slide, but this is just a sense of the wealth of experience that we have in the education space at Amazon Web Services. There's a few here from down under, UWA, you can see there, Murdoch University, Open Universities Australia, but many higher education institutions in Australia leverage AWS and leverage EdTechs that are powered by AWS. And we just see that sort of growing exponentially. Some of you probably have seen this graphic before, but it really helps us start to focus in on where government spend, government policy is happening within the EdTech space. Augmented experiential virtual reality, artificial intelligence, robotics, and blockchain. We have a member in Singapore, for example, that's providing university certificates through a blockchain-based platform. So this kind of trend of technology being instrumental and ingrained in a university, a K-12, a learning experience is just becoming more and more prevalent. And you guys as EdTech sit at that chasm where you understand the customer needs and you have to try and translate that into technology solutions. But more importantly now, as last year happened, is the users, the customers are becoming more and more discerning. So they can't just use Zoom anymore. They want to use something that then provides data back to their LMS. They don't want to just use, content as 35-minute videos. They want to understand how learners are engaging with that content and then empowering teachers to make students learn faster and smarter. Hopefully some of you guys have read this report. It comes out every year with Deloitte and EduGrowth. It's a sort of EdTech ecosystem analysis. And this just sets the stage as to why AWS EdStart as a program exists and how we try and help you. So this is what we've found and we've heard is some of the biggest challenges faced by edtechs in Australia. If you guys think these are misaligned to what you find as challenging, please let me know. We'd love to hear your experiences. But customer, investment, talent, and expansion are the kind of top four. And we're sort of really well placed as a company and within the program to help support you on that. And I'll give you some examples as to how we've done that further down the slide set. But to kind of think about ways that we can talk to educators as edtechs in terms of the trends that we're seeing, I want to again showcase some examples that we're seeing through our members around some of these trends. I won't dive into all of them, but just some of them. So learning anywhere, anytime. I mean, this was sort of the buzzword of last year, but I wanted to dive into it a little bit more in terms of how you think about this. So typically it takes about 18 weeks to build a mobile application and a lot of money, particularly in Australia. Labor costs are quite high there, so coding costs are quite high. But typically 25% of those apps are abandoned after first use. So when you're thinking about going mobile, going more native in terms of where students are learning, it's important to think about this iteratively and to make sure you have the tools available to you to actually build that in an iterative way. So this is a very sort of messy slide, but it really just showcases the depth of mobile technology that we have at AWS that you can then use to engage your learners through a mobile app in a way that doesn't cost a lot of money, cost a lot of capital up front to ensure that your learners can actually experience the app in the way that you want them to. So an example of one of our members in Thailand, Vonda, they've sort of taken this to the next level. And it's a really interesting business model where they offer corporate learning to large enterprises in Thailand. And the first thing that they did was sort of bake in that gamification of learning. So you can see all of their screens there are centered around this little squirrel that takes you through this journey and helps you learn about whether it's health and safety or due diligence or compliance. But the next step that they took was they said, actually, the biggest challenge for us in Thailand is to get our learners off of Line, which is the most prevalent social media platform, messaging platform in Thailand, and into our learning environment. People get distracted, they click over to WhatsApp, they click over to TikTok. So what they did is they said, let's just meet them where they are. So they built their app as a micro app inside the Line platform. So when they go to corporations and offer their learning capability, there's no risk of distraction or lost productivity because they're already in that app, talking to their customers, talking to their colleagues, and then they just go ahead and learn, the learning requirements inside that messaging app. So ways to sort of embrace, new generations' learning habits is important. We can't always push them back to a stuffy Blackboard, PDF-based learning environment. We have to treat them where they're learning, whether that's short content, YouTube, TikTok. Let's try and embrace how they're learning with our technology as well. Another one that's very popular at the moment and sort of spoke to it is gamification. And again, we have a few members in the region that do this, but we also have a few amazing tools at Amazon that allows you to do this. So Lumberyard actually came out of the .com side of the business as opposed to AWS. And this is what I would call a very difficult tongue twister. So let me try. It is a free 3D game engine. There we go, I got it. It's a free 3D game engine that you as developers can download. It's an open source software that you can then build out very easy games for your learners to play along with, to use to achieve their learning outcomes. And to sort of show you how easy it is, one of the universities in Singapore, Nanyang Polytechnic, was one of the early adopters of this game development software as part of their gaming module. And hopefully this video works. They actually built this in about 3 weeks. Fresh graduates, fresh students built this quite incredibly beautiful, Japanese style game, and it was all free within this software that is called Amazon Lumberyard. Very Studio Ghibli if you ever watched any of that. So a really good tool to start messing around with, integrating gamification into your content and building really immersive experiences for learners. Coupled with that is Amazon Game Lift. This is where you build that, you built the game, you built the code, you want to host it on an infrastructure. Amazon Game Lift is essentially our managed game development, game hosting platform on Amazon Web Services. I won't dive into the details, but it takes away all of that heavy lifting. So it enables you as EdTech founders, as CTOs, as CEOs to build the gamification and then host it on our platform in a very sort of low effort manner. And we've got some very kind of significant gaming customers that speak to the kind of the quality of that and the standard of that. I guess, why does that matter from an educational perspective? It's really because, again, with the onset of learning online and the sort of the wearing down of learners from Zoom, from video-based learning, from live lectures, from pre-recorded lectures, there's this trend that learners are becoming much more receptive to a more engaging and more immersive learning style. And this is just sort of some of the stats that point to that. So this survey was conducted by one of our members in Southeast Asia called Solve Education. They're a game-first learning platform. And you can see, right, there's learners talking about how they'd be more productive. It would increase their engagement. It would motivate them to be more competitive. All the things that we want to instill in learners: engagement, competitiveness, one could argue, to go ahead and learn faster and learn smarter. This is a really interesting member of ours, where again, why fight with your learners? If you sit on a train anywhere in Asia, you'll probably see people on their phones, holding their phone sideways, building farms, playing Candy Crush, building things on their phone that takes up a lot of time, but they're not learning anything. So what they did was they built this game called Dawn of Civilization, which was a civilized-based game, but also increased their numeracy and their literacy skills whilst they were playing. And this was actually targeted at people inside of Southeast Asia that potentially couldn't actually get to a school or be part of a formal learning environment, whether there was family pressures or financial pressures. So they built this game, and just a little video showcasing how the game works. So it's just a simple sort of like Sim City or Civilization game. As you go through, there's sort of challenges, spelling tests, some math equations that you have to do. Inside of it, we increase your capability. So very interesting. They're a not-for-profit organization, and they've actually been funded by USAID and Asian Development Bank to actually dive deeper, into how this can be pushed out to many, many more individual learners across the region that need help, accessing a more formal education. Ivan touched on AI, and there's many different ways that you can leverage this capability and this technology. I think one area that edtechs haven't thought that deeply about in a lot of ways is how can they use AI to support a teacher. Teachers always hear the word of automation and AI, and some of them, rightly feel threatened by that. But actually, it's a way to empower them to make decisions faster and to make their jobs easier. And I want to give you a sort of real example of that. So Open Durian is one of our Thai AWS EdStart members. And what they've done is build out the AI part of our technology to allow teachers to create online content much, much faster. So if you can see in this next slide, they've leveraged one of our technologies called Amazon Recognition, which is an image recognition tool. So a lot of the content that they have on their platform is English as a second language learning. So teachers will upload pictures, such as the one here, and they'll ask students to, identify objects in the picture using English words. So if I'm a teacher and I have to upload 300 pictures for my course and then self-identify all the words in those pictures to mark my students against, that's very time consuming and it's not very valuable work in terms of what the teacher can actually do. So what they leveraged on is Amazon Recognition, where you can quickly, as a teacher, search for an image of a balloon, pick that in, and at the back end, Amazon Recognition will identify the objects in the picture.
Lighthouse.
And then you can post this content into your platform to enable those learners to learn, self-verify, validate themselves, without having to go ahead and be a teacher, putting in all of those hours of doing that work yourself. So they built a kind of quite neat front end of a Google image search. And then as they pick images, that artificial intelligence of Amazon Recognition will do the image recognition for the teacher. And they can go ahead and push this live into the class, into the learning environment. This can be done on images. This can be done in terms of translation of language. We also have an OCR capability. So you can take from handwriting to text, or from text to speech, or from speech to text. So all of these different ways where you want a more engaging learning environment. Don't spend the effort, don't allow the teachers to spend that effort that they have on very mundane tasks. So that's sort of an example of some of the members that we have inside of this program and some of the work they've been doing. I'll now just sort of spend the next 10 minutes talking about the program itself and what it offers. So the program now has been in Asia Pacific for 2.5 years. We launched it in June 2018. So we have hundreds of members spanning from India, all the way across to Japan, Korea, up to China, down through Southeast Asia to Australia, New Zealand. So many different learning cultures, different learning environments that we've been, fortunate enough to learn from. And we have members that have, connected with each other and learned from each other. So we have members from China talking to our Singapore members, talking to our Indian members. And there's just so many different examples of how they've built their products and how they can collaborate together. The reason that we built this program was really to drive these tenets. We want to engage with you guys very early. We know it's a long road ahead to get to the millions of users that you want to get to, particularly in the education space. So we want to engage with you early and make sure that you think about building out your capabilities in the right way, in a scalable way, in a way that sets you up for success down the road, but also allows you to hit your targets in the short term. For us as a company, we have tens of thousands of universities, of learning institutions on our platform globally. And we hear very vocally from them about the solutions that they need and the solutions that they want, which is great. But we are an infrastructure company. We don't build solutions as such. We provide the Lego, the foundations to build solutions. So where you guys are our champions, our heroes, our sort of like shining lights, where we can go to universities, we can go to schools, we can go to departments of education and say, oh, you want an online proctoring solution. You want a platform dedicated to learn critical skills. You want a platform dedicated to ensure students' emotional well-being is taken care of. These are our partners in that space, in Australia, in the region that you can talk to. But we can only do that if we work with you, we know who you are, and we've engaged with you. So that's why the program exists, and that's why we want to engage with you early and go on that journey with you. So there's 2 tiers to the program. And it's really a gradual progression through the tiers if you need it to be. So we start with the innovator tier, which is really focused on very, very early stage startups. 0, 1, 2 years old as a company. Okay, you're at the ideation stage. You've probably got an idea. Maybe you're a teacher with a great idea. Maybe you're an entrepreneur with a great idea. You want to build out that capability and sort of build out that there's a demand in the market for it. That program tier provides you $500 of promotional credit, access to our global community, access to the events that we run across the region. As you grow and progress as a company, you become a member. And I'll touch base in the next slide as to what those benefits entail. So all of the white colored font is the benefits as an innovator. You add on the green colored font when you become a member. So you can become an innovator and then transition into a member, or if you're at the right stage, you can go straight into being a full member. So across the 4 pillars of community, technical, financial, and marketing, we run a sort of myriad of different activities and different events. Typically, when we first engage with a member, the financial part is the starting point of the conversation. If you're running your infrastructure on AWS, you don't have financial support. I think at BlueChilli, you guys got quite a lot of generous support. So you maybe have had, a journey with AWS on credits. But if not, we talk to you about your plans for the next 6 to 9 months and how we can engage with you, provide you credits to help you scale up without worrying about infrastructure costs for that time period. And then as you come into the program, you receive that acceptance email, receive those credits, the other pillars become much more prevalent and much more impactful, I would argue. The community piece is so powerful. Before pandemics and before I couldn't fly anywhere, we'd come to Australia 2, 3, 4 times a year. We would do founders dinners. We would run events. We would run events with EduGrowth. We do investor introductions. One of the things that we did back in 2019 was we worked with EdTech Asia, sorry, and we offered our members discounted access to their exhibition booth, their Innovation Alley booth. So we worked with EduGrowth and EdTech Asia, and we got our members access to that at a much lower rate, and then ran a whole other series of events around that. So some of that is virtual now, some of that is not as impactful virtually. So we've pivoted to different types of events. Ivan runs monthly technical webinars. We run monthly business webinars. We run founders dinners virtually, virtual happy hours, just so the community solidifies. You learn from each other and we learn from you, quite honestly. The investor piece is quite interesting because different types of investors want to engage with members and edtech companies in different ways. So it's a bit more organic in the way that we work in that space. So we run closed door pitch events where investors tell us the types of companies they want to look to invest in, and we invite our members to come and pitch to them. We do more public, sort of open forum pitch days where we have a broader spectrum of investors and educators and potential customers, and we invite our members to come and pitch their product, pitch their journey, and try and drive engagement that way. And then we also do sort of one-to-one introductions where an investor specifically is looking for a company or a type of company, and we showcase the members that we have and then facilitate that introduction. We just did that very recently with a company in Australia and a new investor in Singapore that's just come into the market. The technical piece is hopefully self-explanatory. Maybe Ivan touched on some of the examples, but it's about proactively working with you to think about your product journey. Think about, as your users become more discerning, more demanding in the years to come, how you bake that into your products, how you integrate the right tools into your products to make sure that you own the value of your product. You own what your learners are doing on the platform, you understand that, and you provide that feedback, 1, back into the product, but 2, back into the teachers and the learners themselves as how they're learning and how they're doing. On the marketing front, again, a few different opportunities. So as I mentioned, event exhibition, event showcase with some of the events that we sponsor or that we run ourselves in Australia and regionally. Case studies, customer assets, where we talk about you globally through our presentations at events, to media, to other customers around the world. And also we do PR engagement. So we talk about our members with our PR spokespeople. They create media alerts, push those out into the market where publications in Australia can hear about your story and talk about your story in their publications. So we've had really good success with that in Australia, and I'll share one member that benefited from that success shortly. Right now, actually. So Sasyan was one of our earliest members in the program. They joined back in 2018. And if you aren't familiar with what they do, their sort of main product, hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but their main product is Assure, which is sort of their cyber monitoring capability. So if I'm a child in a school network and I'm receiving abuse, I'm giving abuse, I'm accessing sites I shouldn't be accessing, this software monitors that and provides reports to parents, potentially teachers, school administrators, to ensure that kids are not doing anything that they shouldn't be doing or should be or would potentially be affected by. So when we sort of first started engaging with them, they were a very new company. They had a few customers in the region in Australia, but we really loved the solution. We did PR with them, we did engagement with them. They had quite a few articles that came out of that PR engagement with us. And through a lot of their own hard work and effort, they've grown massively. So they've just won a significant 6-year agreement with the Department of Education in South Australia, which is now being rolled out. They have partnership with us, with Telstra, with Palo Alto Network. as well as many other independent schools in Australia. And now we're working with them to go regional. So they're a partner on AWS. How do we bring them into events, into sales conversations we have in the international school market in Singapore, for example, or Indonesia or Philippines? So this is sort of a journey with us that we want to bring you along on. Sasian is one that's kind of gone from strength to strength, and I'm sure that you guys will all grow incredibly well and incredibly successfully, and we'd love to be a part of that journey and sort of help you along the way. So another example of PR that we've done is with Open Durian. So this was again, one of our earlier members in Thailand. I showed you the demo earlier of them using Amazon recognition. We did PR engagement with them. Again, very widely covered in Thailand, and they actually found a new CEO due to this engagement. So they were looking for a CEO, and they had 4 or 5 people reach out to them after that publication and said, I want to be a part of this. And they were able to kind of, find someone that helped drive them now to 8 million users monthly, learning English, and doing test prep on their platform. I spoke to the types of events that we do with our members. This might be in 2022 or 2023, whenever we can do events again, but virtual or physical, we invite our members to come down, showcase their wares on our stand. We want to sit behind you guys. We want to hear your story. Customers want to hear your story more than hearing about virtual servers and databases that are managed. They care about the impact to their teachers, to their learners. So we want to hear about that from you, and so do they. So that's kind of, again, some of the event opportunities that you have inside the program. So I'll stop there. You can scan the QR code to apply, or I can send you all of the form after we finish up. But I saw a few things going on in the chat room, so let me just check those out.
So I'm going to fess up here on the competitive gaming platform stuff.
Yeah, please.
No, so I work with disengaged kids. And one of the key reasons that kids disengage is they can't keep up with the pace in the classroom. So to then add a reward system that exacerbates that, we'll finish. And that competitive one against the other, while it kind of like appeals to everybody in a Western capitalist mindset where everything is great and you're going to be a winner, which Australia is really good at, because we're about 20% above the OECD average for kids aged 16 wanting to be best in class. So, I mean, we're brilliant at being super competitive. It actually creates a huge problem. And that's just, I'm like, oh, can we not have a gaming platform that actually rewards people for supporting each other or working collaboratively, or, that actually has the reward system based on something other than being the best, being the fastest, doing it better than everybody else. So it's not necessarily comparative to others, but is looking at personal improvement over time and that type of thing, rather than that leaderboard. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think, there's nothing stopping you guys, right, from rethinking how learners learn and maybe removing that element. I think the examples that I come from an Asian background. That competitiveness there is ingrained in test prep and an entrance exam. That's why they've gone down that route. But the way that you would design a game, again, is entirely up to how you would want to motivate learners. If that's a rewards-based, a kindness-based learning, absolutely, we'd love to see that, and we'd love to kind of talk about that. So I'm completely open to that. Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah. I saw a question from Kellyanne. So yeah, it's no investment from your end. It's an entirely free program to all members, both from a financial perspective, but also from a time perspective. If you want to become a member and engage very early on, and then leave us alone for a year and then come back again, that's absolutely fine. We put on programs, we put on deliverables, and you guys choose as to how much you want to be involved. For us, it's just about helping you guys scale faster, be successful quicker, and then obviously that helps us as well as it helps you.
Yeah, hey Sam. I mean, it sounds really appealing to us. I mean, we're at early learning, basically hardware technology company that's all about getting kids active when they interact with digital technology and learn. But yeah, it'd be great to have a chat with you at some point about about it a bit more. I think we're quite interested in part of our model is connecting with educational game developers and plugging our API into theirs.
Yeah, cool.
There's a fit, but yeah, I mean, so yeah, it sounds really, really good.
Yeah, definitely. We'd love to talk about it. Just anytime. I think the best thing is, you know, we'll send the form for all of you guys. You can fill it out, and that then is like a real good kind of base for a call, a talking point, and then plan out, you know, what we can do to support you in a better way and in a programmatic way. So that's really where we want to get with you guys.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
Hi, Sam. Can I just ask what you hear in relation to mental health needs at the moment?
Yeah, great. I mean, it's a super hot topic, right? I think you're probably very aligned with that and sort of what's been going on in the last year. I think really where my personal, like, not view, but my personal sort of desire for it and where it needs to get to is a really tight integration into what everything else is already there. Because a lot of people are building out mental health courses, mental health, you know, awareness, enablement for teachers, for students. But we want to make sure that it's being delivered in a way that, again, they're already in that learning environment. So if they're in an LMS already, how do you create maybe a lower touch point with them, you know, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and then if they are struggling or self-identifying as struggling, or you identify them that they have some challenges, then provide that intervention. So it becomes much more sort of proactive, where you have that data, whereas instead of saying, okay, here's a month course or a 6-hour course, you know, this is for the teachers, and then they don't actually have that experience to identify who's struggling and who's not struggling. So that's kind of where I would love to see it personally. But as you say, with learning from home, with the challenges that comes with that, with everything else that teenagers and young children have to deal with these days, it's such a prevalent topic. Absolutely.
That's good to know. Yeah, I'm not surprised, but it's interesting that they, you know, people are talking to you about it and wanting it to sort of integrate so well. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of companies that are kind of spinning up in the last year who are focused on, you know, mental health of students, teachers, for sure. Absolutely.
Good. It's really good. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Louise.
Yeah, I just wrote in the chat so before we skipped it with the quick break, but yeah, just write in the chat what have been your insights from these two sessions, and just, you know, to refresh your memory for the future, but also to share with Sam and Ivan. And if you have any other questions,
Yes, Sam and Ivan, there's probably a question for both of you. Obviously, the being, you know, featured by EdStart, you know, whether it's in your presentations to schools or in presentations like this, you know, being a case study of this is what this EdTech does. Like, if one of these companies joins as an EdStart member, how, like, what is most likely to get them featured? You know, when you're talking to a school or a university or a potential customer for them.
Yeah, that's a really helpful question to kind of frame that. I guess I can talk about the experiences that we've seen with other members and how they've sort of been picked up, because as a company, we're very deliberate in our PR, in our you know, sort of way that we present ourselves to the market. We're a very customer obsessed company, so we always want to present our customers to the market as opposed to ourselves and how wonderful we are, because you get bored of hearing that. So really, the way that we would sort of qualify, I suppose, members to be part of that experience is, what's the impact that you guys are having on the education space? You know, have you got really crisp, you know, anecdotes around learners learning better, you know, teachers being more empowered, administrators saving money? That's really where we can then map that, and Ivan can map that with the technology that underpins that. And that story then goes out to the market in a very powerful and a very impactful way. You know, to Louise's point, there's topics within education that come to the fore and then dip away again. And we sometimes want to ride those waves. You know, cybersecurity and SASIAN at the time was a really, really relevant topic in Australia. You know, data sort of sovereignty and cybersecurity in education space. So that was a story for us that demonstrated members are doing this and AWS is supporting that. Mental health may be the one for this year, but the more that we hear about the impact that you're making, the more we can then brief our PR teams on that. And then they build a narrative to go out to the media with you guys on that. So that's really where, the more times you proactively send me impact and details on what you guys are doing, the better it is, because we do have hundreds of members in the program now. So the more you guys are vocal, the better it is for us to really support you.
Thanks for that, Sam. Ivan, anything you'd add to that?
So for us, definitely it helps if you are using the services innovatively, not just the hardware, but creative, impactful users of the different services in order to impact education. As Sam has said, we are a very customer obsessed company, and at the end of the day, we want to make sure that in EdTech there is impact. And the more impactful it is, the more innovative the solutions are. It is something that gets me and Sam excited about when we go like, we must push this because we think it's something that's very impactful. It may be boring, but it's very impactful. We will really drive that conversation because I think both of us do have quite a bit of background in education, and we are really passionate about education. And this is what we are looking out for in a lot of our startups.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
All right. So thank you so much, Sam and Ivan and everyone for the questions. Does anyone need a bio break now, or are we good to move on to Andrew? Like, it's okay. I don't want to shame anyone that needs to use the toilet or whatever. All right. So there's no anything. Andrew, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Bye, Sam, and Ivan, if you leave as well, bye to you. Otherwise,
no, I'm just waving to Andrew. I'll stick around. I want to hear what he says. Yeah,
you are welcome to stay, all of you. I don't want to take anyone out. So yeah, Andrew, over to you. As I've told Sam and Ivan, in terms of questions, do as you like. You can ask people to wait for the end, do it while you're talking, or just write in the chat. But yeah, other than that, over to you.
Thanks, Philippa, and nice to meet everyone, and nice to see you again, Sam and Louise. I remember we were doing a pitch event, I think a couple of months back as part of EduGrowth, so it's good to see some familiar faces. I suppose I'll start with a brief introduction of myself and how I'm involved in the EdTech industry. Perhaps that's helpful. So I work at Greenwich Capital. We're a boutique private investment firm based in Sydney. So we look at investing into established businesses, private companies based in Australia. And we focus on a number of sectors, mostly service-based sectors like real estate, healthcare, financial services, but education is a key focus for us as well. The team here, we've got a small team, and each of us focus on their own sector, and education is my sector. So since joining Greenwich, I've really dived into the sector in quite some detail, predominantly the market in Australia, and looked at it from the perspective of where do we think the markets are going over the next 10 years. So we have a long-term investment horizon, and so we want to know where we think the winners will come from in a 10+ year time frame. So with the education sector, I guess there's many different aspects to it, or different business models and customer segments. Obviously, there's the university segment, there's K-12 high schools, there's the corporate segment and vocational segment. Each of these, I guess, in Australia has varying pros and cons. Certainly one that I've spent a lot of time on recently is K-12 sector. And that was where I partnered with EduGrowth last year to launch a white paper focusing on the K-12 market in Australia, which is, I would say, the largest market. It's about 40% of all EdTech companies in Australia. But certainly the other sectors are also interesting. I think corporate upskilling is one that's in the media a lot these days. Particularly, you've seen that the universities are having a hard time at the moment with their revenues, so they're having to look at diversifying income streams. So that's one thing that they're looking at, and partnering with EdTech companies is an obvious way to accelerate that fit. And also the vocational sector is probably not where it should be from the perspective of these new skills required for the future workforce. And so because of that, you've got a lot of the corporates, a lot of the large blue chip companies in Australia having to train their staff a lot themselves and give them those extra skills. And the way that they're doing that is partnering with EdTech companies that have innovative offerings. So I guess to summarize it at high level, the K-12 market we've seen is the largest in Australia for EdTech companies, but certainly from an investment perspective, we're seeing a lot of money go into the corporate upskilling section. I might just pause there to see if there's any questions.
I don't know. Well, it's just good to hear. So the majority of the startups on the call are focusing on K-12. Mark, that is leaving, also focuses on higher education, and Kern from Grasshopper, they're focused on early education. So yeah, good to hear that the 40% represents also with more than 40% in this call.
Yeah. Well, perhaps then, because there's a few recommendations out of that white paper focusing on K-12, so I might just talk about those because I think they're relevant as well to startup companies. And certainly those companies based in Australia, we think it's one of the best countries in the world to launch an EdTech company from. And the reason for that is because you do have this history of policies that are driven by the government around making sure that any education initiative or program is linked to evidence of improved learning outcomes. And then what that means is the EdTech companies, I guess, have a much higher bar set for them in which they need to make sure that their product is working. And so once you've got that set, then your ability to go international with your product is much greater. And that was one of the interesting things that I saw from the analysis is, I think it was like close to 80% of EdTech companies that are, say, above $1 million in revenue are already exporting internationally. And if you compare that to other industries, that's quite unheard of. Usually companies expand and take a long time to expand geographically in Australia before they go international. I just saw the comment from Sam, what are the markets they export to? So there's definitely the English-speaking markets, which a lot of people focus on, being the US and the UK. Certainly the US is a very large market and quite lucrative. I think some companies fall in the trap going to the US and not understanding the full competitive landscape, however. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But certainly if you've got like a literacy type product rather than math specific, the Asian markets are really promising. Southeast Asia, I think from what I've heard in the interviews we did as part of the analysis, there's a really good reputation for Australia in those markets for literacy type products. So certainly those markets are some of the main focus areas. Just on the product again, one of the things we notice is it's important when you're starting out to have what we call a holistic solution. And what we mean by that, I think Sam was talking about it when I joined, but it's all about data privacy and security, as well as what your product actually does. Because if you're selling to schools, one of the things that they care about is to make sure that they've still retained that data ownership. And if you look at it from an investment perspective, one of the biggest threats to the K-12 companies here is that you might have Google or Microsoft come in with their expanded product suite and kind of eat your lunch a little bit in terms of what you're trying to provide for those schools. But the good advantage you might have over those companies is particularly how you're working with the schools around the privacy of their data and the security of that. So I think that's a really important point to highlight as well. Are there any other questions at this point? Just looking at my notes, there's also we've talked about product and international expansion. The third recommendation that we speak about in the report is all about your go-to-market strategy. So I would say that's the #1 challenge to create a scalable, sizable business here in Australia. Certainly, we said that 40% of the market is K-12, but across all of the sectors, K-12 or corporate or university sectors, there's a lot of small companies, very few large companies. And what that means, it's highly competitive. And you're selling to people within schools and universities that have a finite amount of time to trial new products. And so that's a significant barrier to try and overcome. I think one area that Australian companies could probably do better at is partnering and collaborating with each other. And whether that be like a partnership in how you go to market. If one company has networks into these schools in Victoria, another company might have a network in these schools in New South Wales. Is there a way you can pool those relationships and resources to scale more efficiently? Because otherwise it just takes too long. It's too costly. And obviously that would impede on your ability to raise capital as well. We're seeing the start of that as well, because we've got one of the biggest listed EdTech companies in Australia is 3P Learning. And we just saw they were, last year, they were a takeover target from a company in California. And then I think Baiju from India was also looking at purchasing them. But what we've seen recently is they've combined with Blake eLearning to create an even bigger Australian company. So I think that's kind of foreshadowing this partnership approach, which I think is going to be really important. Any other questions?
Andrew, have you seen a kind of type of go-to-market approach when you were studying up that really worked, you know, outside of kind of, I guess, the traditional model, a traditional approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly what we're seeing a lot more of now is the direct-to-consumer model. Rather than trying to go through the gatekeepers in schools. Can you pivot your model somewhat to go direct to a parent or a student directly? That model is very successful in India and China, probably because this is just me speculating, but perhaps the school system over there isn't quite as mature, so that the trust levels aren't that high. Whereas here, I think for the most part, parents have sort of left it up to the school's devices to run their kids' programs. But certainly, I think COVID has been an interesting aspect to that, because parents are suddenly part of that school life when the kids were working from home for that period of time. And so that's a real opportunity to see if you can pivot your product to a direct-to-consumer model. And certainly, if you can't do that, once you get your product to a certain scale, it's all about taking that leap as a founder and hiring professional sales staff to help you and support you. Because what we call the founder sales approach, it is that slow approach, and you are kind of connected to the product and emotionally. And so having other people go and sell your product is the first step, I would say, to creating a scalable go-to-market model.
Interestingly, we tried that. So I've got a company called the Inventorium, and we have an alternative high school really for disengaged kids. And we found that trying to sell to schools is just a nightmare. We now sell pretty much to parents and to the flow coordinators and the youth workers. They get us into the schools. So we found a backdoor approach to get into the schools. But we hit regulatory boundaries across different states is problematic. But we also sell to homeschoolers. And that's, we had 10 homeschoolers last year on our 7 to 9 platform who bought it as we were writing it because they were desperate for something. We've got 40 already so far, and these are all paying monthly subscriptions. So that's on, and it's all going word of mouth. They're not responding to our adverts. When we follow up where the leads are coming from, it's all word of mouth. It's all what parents are saying on parent platforms and stuff like that, rather than any sort of marketing. In fact, we almost find the more marketing we do, the worse it gets. And if we just shut up and let the product speak for itself and the kids that are using it talk about it, it almost gets better. But that, like getting into the market, that's just been absolutely a nightmare for us.
Absolutely. And another approach I've seen actually from a company based in Brisbane is selling direct to teachers as well. And that was the way that they got started. It's kind of like a bottom-up approach where instead of selling to the school on an enterprise level, you look at how can you improve the teachers' efficiency and effectiveness in the way they run their classrooms. And what was interesting was that the teachers are willing to spend out of their own pocket to do so. And then once you've got as you mentioned, Eddie, once you've got a certain word of mouth, then you are, I think, in a much better position from a leverage perspective to start talking to schools. And you could say, hey, I've got X many of your parents or teachers in your school using my product. Wouldn't it be efficient to implement an enterprise solution here and roll it out across all parents or teachers?
We've even have, I've spoken to schools, because the first thing when a parent comes to us, the first thing we do is go to the school they're currently enrolled at to have a conversation with them. And we've had like some of the top fee-paying schools walk away from 25 to 30 grand worth of fees and let us take the student as a homeschooler. Not interested in doing something that different. And I'm just like, where do you go? It's when they don't even think like a business, even if they're not thinking educationally, can't get them to think like a business. So I'm really interested in your experience of startups that have managed to get in through that kind of like whole model change, because our platform is the whole thing. It's not, you don't apply it to a single subject, it's a replacement for the whole curriculum. They do hours instead of, but you could have some kids do hours and the rest of the kids, it's not, doesn't have to be the whole school. So we have like 4 or 5 kids from some schools that come to us and the rest of the kids are at that school, and that's fine. But we always get in a back door.
Yeah, I think what I would definitely recommend is from my time speaking with David Linke and the EduGrowth group and just experiencing this today, there's certainly a really strong cohort of business owners and founders that have created great products, all going through similar issues. So looking at those successful founders that have done it over the past 10 years, like the founders of 3P, there's a few others, and just tapping their brains to see what's the best approach, how could it fit for your specific product, because they'll provide a much more nuanced kind of educational lens. I'm not in the field every day talking to teachers and principals, so I don't have that perspective. But certainly from reviewing the whole market, I think from an investment perspective, I think there is going to be a tipping point, but there are still some challenges, and I think the main thing that can help Australia is kind of this partnership collaboration approach.
Because also when you said about, we're data driven here in terms of making decisions, but it's like, how do you get enough students to get the data to get a decision?
Yeah, I mean, it's always about a groundswell, isn't it? I think the more you can go into schools and just do sort of very short trials, short demonstrations of impact for teachers, that then again that word of mouth travels through, and then students will come into the platform and you'll start to discern data from that. Then can, again, it's almost like a flywheel, prove to the teachers that there's impact. There's change that's happening because they're on that. And then that trickles up into a decision maker's stack of paper, their clipboard, right? You want to be able to demonstrate that what your product does it better. And then you kind of create that flywheel of proving that out. And then people start to take notice.
All right, I'm going to just jump in because we only have 13 minutes to go, and I will let Andrew continue, and then when we have time at the end, or for this conversation to continue on other channels. But it's very interesting.
Sure. Yeah, well, I suppose they were the main points that I wanted to cover. Certainly, I wish everyone the best of luck in the program. But if there's any other questions, I'm happy to take it now as well.
Sorry, then questions continue.
All right, jump in with a question if I can, Andrew. It's Pete from BlueChilli. Obviously, COVID has been the big kind of driving force in EdTech in the last 12 months, both economically, but in K-12, teaching remotely. In terms of trends, what do you see as investors are talking about or looking at being the drivers of growth in the next year to 10 years?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. In terms of COVID, I think it hasn't created any new trends, but it's probably accelerated some that were already bubbling away over the past 5 years. And one of them is certainly it's highlighted the need for better infrastructure, better digital infrastructure to make sure that remote learners are able to access the right technology and supports. That's certainly a big one. I think also schools and corporates will probably see it now as it's not necessarily a drop in productivity or the school's learning outcomes as probably initially expected. And so there's a much greater platform that you can then engage with your customer base based on this recent experience. But certainly from a just overall economic impact, certainly it's impacted a lot of jobs around the world. And I think I was looking at some Google search trends, and you can see the number of people searching for online learning or upskilling or particular courses has spiked. So there's certainly going to be a lot of people looking to, I guess, retrain or upskill, which is also a great opportunity for some great EdTech products out there.
Feel free to speak generally or from your perspective, but how does that affect what you look at in a potential investment?
How does COVID affect?
Well, I mean, the trends over COVID, economics, acceleration of trends. I mean, you mentioned that trends haven't actually changed over the last 5 years. COVID's just accelerated them. So what do you look for in a good investment in an EdTech space, and has that changed?
Yeah, so certainly from the Greenwich's perspective, we invest in established businesses, so not in the startup phase. But to do so, we need to get a good understanding of what companies will likely be ready to grow and get into that stage quickly over the next few years. And we probably wouldn't have looked at EdTech 5 years ago because it's just too infant here in Australia. But we want to be in a good position to find those companies in Australia that have. We definitely know all the companies here have got great products, but they've got those scalable go-to-market models. They've developed an approach that can make sure that they've got a moat around their business as well, which protects from those external threats from the big tech companies. So we look at more on a company-by-company basis, how strong is the economic model. But certainly from I guess, where the industry is at, we think, well, we've certainly placed our bets that this is where we want to spend our time and resources, networking basically, with all the business owners in the area to find some attractive investment opportunities.
It sounds like you think that like Google adding a product or Microsoft adding something to Teams is probably the biggest threat to emerging ed tech companies.
Yeah, I'd say it's the biggest external threat. Absolutely. I think Google. Well, actually, we'll use Microsoft as an example. So Microsoft a few years ago purchased Minecraft, the game for kids, and then they pivoted that game to create an education platform out of it that's rolled out in the US really successfully, which teaches kids maths, science, coding, probably creativity, all those aspects. So it is strategically important for these companies because they want to get kids onto the platform as soon as possible and be accustomed to their suite of products. So I do see it as a threat, but in saying that, a lot of the business owners I spoke to seemed quite confident that what they've developed can't be replicated. That's kind of the consensus, but I think that it still remains to be seen.
I see Kern has a question, so I'll...
Kellyanne as well, and we have a few minutes, so let's...
Yeah, so I was just going to say that a lot of, what's important to invest in is actually determined by the departments themselves. So at the moment, the Department of Education is making a very strong push towards child mental health, but also creativity. And last week, Microsoft had a whole series of seminars on how to use digital pens and technology, because the use of drawing, the hand to eye, has very high outcomes for connecting ideas, which is creativity. So I think that it's really hard to get into some of these schools, from a marketing point of view, if you don't have the thing that they're focusing on. And once they make a focus, that's it. It all moves in that direction. So that's just been my experience anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Kellyanne, and one that I probably should have touched on is we certainly look at across all sectors, whether it be health, financial services or education, is where is the government providing the funding and support towards? And certainly, Scott Morrison has been talking about the need for better vocational training and upskilling. We've yet to see that come to fruition, but that's an area that we're looking at. And also on the K-12 side, there's been a lot of state-based governments releasing their digital strategies. So as you mentioned, Kellyanne, it's seeing whether your product can align to those strategies, and that, I guess, that would be great in these conversations with your customers.
Awesome. I just had a question, Andrew. Yeah, thanks for everything so far. Do you have some insights from the early learning kindergarten space? I know that wasn't the main focus of the report or anything, but yeah, I think just any little bits of useful information you picked up along the way would be really useful.
Yeah, thanks, man. So what I've seen from an investment perspective is the pre-K side of things is very small comparatively to K-12, to university, to corporate. But I have recently just seen a few apps that are helping students in that space. I haven't studied it in too much detail. Certainly, if you talk from an investment perspective, a lot of private equity firms going back 20 years have looked at investing into the bricks and mortar childcare centres. And that was a big profit pool for them over time. From an EdTech perspective, I haven't seen enough to really comment.
All good. Thank you. It's great.
Hi, Andrew. Can I just quickly sort of narrow you down in your research into the mental health side of EdTech? and ask you what you've seen in relation to investor interest, because there traditionally has been very low investor interest in mental health tech.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think when we talk about it here, just in our teams, because the health area is another focus for us. And if there was a, I guess, intersection of ideas between health and wellness, which is getting a lot of attention at the moment, and education, I think that would definitely pique an investor's interest. It would just come down to size and scalability. I think that there are, as you said, probably the reason why the interest has been low is the economic models probably didn't stack up to the investors' liking around these products. But certainly, just like in the EdTech space, there's been a lot of noise over the past couple of years. In the health and wellbeing space, there also has been a lot of noise, which includes mental health, obviously. So hopefully there's something out there that that kind of shines the light on the importance of it. And I think the EdTech market in Australia is kind of waiting for that unicorn type company to really show the possibilities, and then that's when you really get the institutional investors involved.
I hope that's us.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
All right, we have 2 minutes to go, so I think we'll leave it here. Please write your insights in the chat. It would be great to see that. And thank you, Andrew. This has been very insightful, as the questions show. It's just, this is an area where we're all trying to figure out how to get investment to, both from the performance of the business, but also what investors want to see. So thank you so much. Thank you to the EdStart team. Sorry, I'm EdTech EdStart. It's getting confusing for me now. Thank you so much for being available to talk about these topics of EdTech Trends with the startups. Is it okay if they reach out to you if they have any questions?
Absolutely.
I know that. Great. Thank you, Sam. The form will go around, and I hope we have a lot of you participate in the EdStart program. And that is it. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That was really, really good.
That was
Thanks,
awesome.
Ivan and Sam, for organizing it. Thanks for Andrew for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Sam. And yeah, thanks so much as well, Ivan.
Thanks, guys.
That was awesome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.